Luther is the most hated character in the Umbrella Academy fandom. The things Luther are most commonly known for are, in order, complaining his father sent him to the moon too often, being in love with his adopted sister, and betraying his other sister at the end of the 4th season. Luther is a complex character, like the rest of the characters in the show. He is shown with strengths and weaknesses. However, even the people who try to give some defense of Luther's character tend to simplify why he is still loyal to his father when the others aren't. It is not wrong to say that children that are abused often put the fault on themselves and idealize their parents. This does often happen. However, Luther was not raised as a child. He was raised as a soldier and as a slave, as were the rest of them. But he was unique. He was the one that would keep them in place when Reginald wasn't there to. So Reginald actively did things to get his loyalty he didn't do with the others. It was a common practice with slave owners in America's past to take one slave away from the others, give them something that the others didn't get, such as a sleeping mat on the master's floor, which would earn that slave's trust so they could be used as a spy among the other slaves, such as discussed in the book To Be a Slave by Julius Lester. Luther mentions that his father would let him sit under the oak tree with him, which the other siblings didn't get to do. This gave him a sense of importance, that his father cared about him, that the other siblings didn't get. However, most people seem to think he got this by being loyal to his father. I disagree with it and suggest his father gave it to him to buy his loyalty. For someone as starved for attention as these children were, it was everything, and Luther would do anything for it. In the comics, Reginald did not assign numbers until he decided the usefulness of each child, and then assigned them suiting numbers. In the show, they were assigned numbers by the time they had nannies, so it must have been a later choice to make one feel more important because of his number. He likely saw the potential in this child that was not very powerful compared to his brothers 5 or 6, but had more of the ability he was looking for. The ability to follow orders without question, and also be able to give them to others and lead them. From this grew probably deliberate fights between 1 and 2, as it gave Luther more motivation to be the best, more of a motivation to obey his father, in order to keep a meaningless title and the limited affection his father would show him. This is the reason that Reginald shut down the budding relationship between Luther and Allison so quickly, because if they were together, she would become his greatest source of joy, and he couldn't have that. He needed Luther to be dependent on him and him alone, and would do practically anything to keep him as such. Because with Luther on his side, he kept the entire family on his side for much longer, with 1/7 the walk. However, with the number 1 and the limited affection his father gave him, came the weight of the ward. In the comics, it is very clear that every one of his siblings blamed him for Ben's death, but the author has said it was no more his fault than anyone else's. He is blamed because he is the group leader, and so the blame automatically falls on him. It is shown in the show that he still believes his randomly assigned numbers a justification for why his opinion should be heeded if it comes to it. However, he also shows the willingness to call family meetings about important things, such as what to do about the mother, and puts it to a vote. He is not only willing to apologize to Diego, the brother he does almost nothing but fight with, but in episode 2, he actually goes to him and waits for him to arrive because he feels honor-bound to apologize to him when proven wrong, even after he gets a knife thrown at him. Luther tries his hardest to be fair and do the right thing on every occasion, and his siblings look to him to lead them at points when they are unsure what to do, such as when they need to stop Vanya in the end. And no, he doesn't have a plan, but I think that shows that they believe the Luther they had known when they left would have had a plan, and he might well have. The Luther that stands before them now hasn't had to lead anyone in 12 years. He's been completely alone and only has had to account for himself. He is falling out of practice in leading. He hasn't even had another person to talk to in 4 years, and for the 8 before that, his only company was a talking chimpanzee, a robot, and whatever scraps of affection his father gave him. But judging from this charming goodnight scene, I'm guessing it was almost none. Luther does show moments when he's a good leader, and everyone's favorite scene with the dancing, the 1st episode, is one of the times his good leadership is shown. He has just messed up, made everyone angry at him, And so he goes to his room and plays a song, deliberately turning up the volume so the whole house can hear him. A song that is so meaningful to all of them that every single one of them starts dancing in their own corners of the house. Most people look at the scene and see the beautiful imagery of everyone dancing alone, yet all connected, but they forget that Luther did that. He united them all right then. Another scene that shows his good leadership is when he puts aside his emotions and calls a house meeting, everyone getting everyone's opinion. Contrast this with Diego, who upon changing his mind about his mother after finding her after the fight, decides to kill her on the spot rather than doing the reasonable thing, which would be to call another house meeting and explain why he has changed his view and now agrees with Luther and Allison. Even though Grace was no more dangerous now than she was 5 minutes ago, all she is doing is sewing and being unaware of what's happening. Diego allows all the siblings to believe the mother was killed by unknown murderers, that they failed to protect her, rather than waiting a few minutes to tell everyone that he changed his mind. Diego refuses to account for his actions, while Luther goes out of the way to account for his actions when he does something wrong. Luther loves his family. He's just incredibly bad at showing it, but then so are most of his family. Diego spends most of his time insulting them, but is very protective of them when they are threatened. 5 is mostly cruel to his family, but has come back in time mostly to save them. Klaus and Allison are perhaps the best, but Klaus's constant jokes makes it hard for his family to relate to him, which is the point, as they are the defense mechanism to keep people from getting too close to him. Allison tries, but her attempts to get close to her sister are often too forceful for her sister, and she reacts negatively. Vanya I will get to when I make a video on her, because she's an interesting case. One of the ways we are shown this love is in the way Luther always carries them when they are taken down. This may seem like a natural choice, as he is the strongest of them, but it is also a very loving, tender thing to do, to carry them, such as when he carries 5 when he is drunk. He tells his siblings to get behind him in the first episode, when there is a gaping hole opening in space and time and they don't know what to do. He is going to use his own body to shield his siblings from harm. His first instinct when he thinks he has won the fight with Hazel is to say Vanya, asking if she is okay. He then takes a chandelier for Allison and Diego, revealing his hidden shame to save his sibling's life. He does this without a care for himself. He would clearly give his life for them, as Ben pretty much says in The Day That Was to Klaus. But if you were in trouble, there is nothing in this world Luther wouldn't do to save you. Luther loves his family, but Luther was raised as a leader of them, always kept apart, the spy among them to report back to his father. He kept them in line. As he was the leader, he was likely blamed whenever any of them did anything wrong, rather than when just him did something wrong, like the rest of them. This would explain the feeling of the weight of the world on his shoulders and this extreme fear of disobeying his father that the rest of them don't have. We must remember that Sir Reginald didn't treat them all the same. He had unique ways to torture and control for each child. However, 5 gives us a bit of an interesting tidbit of information in the first episode, that my brothers and sisters would come to the donut shop and eat until they all puked, which seems like it was a family outing. They all did. Now, I don't think it was an easy choice for Luther to disobey his father. In fact, I think the guilt of it probably made it very difficult every time. And he would probably only end up going with them because them, and particularly Allison, begged him to. This doesn't mean he wanted to any less, though, but more on that later in the video. These are bonding times for them. In Vanya's book, it implies that they were close before Ben died, and that is what drew them apart, and that is when they became strangers under one roof. But Luther was also raised as a military leader. He was raised to lead them into battle, and for that you need a horrible ability, but one his father should have forced on him as much as possible. The ability to sacrifice anyone for the greater good. Luther shows this ability over and over. When he states his willingness to see to kill Grace, despite the grief we see when he sees her dead, when he sends Allison, the woman he loves, in as a distraction for Vanya, who had already almost killed her once, and he didn't know the situation around that. And he saw her kill Pongo, so he thinks it's a high possibility she will kill Allison, but for a chance to save the ward, he's willing to sacrifice her. And of course he's willing to sacrifice Vanya. He shows this ability as well. With Grace, we see the shift when he does this. He stops calling her mom. He calls her Grace. He calls her machine when he didn't before. He distanced himself from her as much as possible, separating himself from the pain that will cause him to lose her. His family loves him as well. I think a good time that shows this is in fact the moment when everyone hates him, when Vanya goes to him. Because in this moment before the twist shows him in the big brother role, even though they are the same age. There are many times when his number one is shown with him being the oldest. And Vanya goes to him. She trusts him. She expects him to comfort her. She expects this because he must have done it before, because he has comforted her before when she's upset, because every other time she's been able to trust him. That's why she goes to him, and that says a lot about their childhood. Of course, we need to face the twist. The fact he was willing to betray her when none of his siblings were willing to. And obviously we have faced part of the reason for that above. He was trained to be willing to sacrifice his siblings. But there was more to it than that. Obviously the fact that she just almost killed Allison is affecting his decision. But it is not just that. What he has that none of the rest of his siblings don't have in the scene is information, and not just information, but very biased information from Pongo. Allison cannot give him information. She cannot talk. So the information he has to base his opinion off of is Pongo. Pongo is out of everyone the most loyal to Sir Reginald. While we do not hear what he tells Luther, we can assume he is going to frame Sir Reginald in the best possible light. That will, of course, frame Vanya in the worst light possible to do that. And honestly, the facts don't look great. Killing her nannies because she doesn't like oatmeal and whatever else she did as a child. Pongo may also even tell Luther that if her powers are back, they need to contain her until they can figure out further action, although that could have also been Luther's decision. The fact is that Luther was given a horrible picture of Vanya from Pongo that the other siblings didn't get. Luther would have told them any facts they had, which we don't know how many they had. Mostly they only seem aware that she had powers and was the one that hurt Allison. But anything they did get would have been told in the matter-of-fact way Luther tells things, rather than trying to make Vanya seem like a villain because it can't be Sir Reginald way Pongo would tell it. Finally, we must look at the ever-so-complicated relationship between Luther and Sir Reginald. We have established why Luther is so loyal to Sir Reginald, because he was groomed to be that way. But how is the relationship now? The answer is horrible. He hates him just as much as his siblings, but he doesn't know how to. The first time we know there is something wrong with this supposedly loyal son is the song he chooses to play. Right after getting back from the moon, directly after his father dies. He plays I Think We're Alone Now. There are many reasons he is playing the song. For his family, to remind them of their childhood. Perhaps to apologize for making them all hate him, but the way he dances to it shows that it holds just as much meaning for him as it does to them. He is finally blissfully free, even if he won't admit it to himself. In fact, not admitting things seems to be one of Luther's favorite things to do. The next sign something is up with this supposedly loyal son is that he has nothing to say at his father's funeral, and honestly, he never once seems choked up with grief for his father. He seems a lot more upset about his mother's death than he does his father's. He doesn't talk about the good times he had with his dad. He doesn't spill a single tear. Doesn't say what he will miss about him. In all of his heartfelt talks with Allison, he has no grief for his father's death. As people talk about, he talks about the extreme isolation he experienced on the moon, not his father's death, which would surely be something a son with a loving relationship with their father would talk about. But there was no love there. Never does anything said about their father bring him to violence, and many horrible things are said about him, but that is not what brings him to violence. At their father's funeral, he tells Diego to shut up, and I'm warning you, but he is not brought to violence until Diego said he couldn't stand the sight of you, which, with his monstrous body, stings very deep, even though Diego didn't know what he was saying, although as he says similar things after he does know, I'm not sure if he would care. But it is the insult about his appearance, not about his father, that brings him to violence. The reason he gives for why he stayed is, I stayed because the war needed me. It is not about his father. It is not dad needed me. He even tells Allison when she was asleep, I was angry you were gone, that you moved on with your life, and that I was still stuck here, alone with dad. So then, why did he stay? If he does not love this man, even if he can't admit it to himself, hates this man, because he's convinced himself this man is right. I stayed because the war needed me. I was foolish enough to think that fathers didn't lie to their children. He convinced himself that everything he and his siblings have been through would be worth it if they could help enough people. And that is why in the end, it is not just his faith in his father that crumbles. It is so briefly his desire to help others. And he doesn't even want to save the ward, because until this moment, he would have only been saving it for his father. Because while he quickly regains his desire to not see the ward end at any cost, the two things had always been tied together in his mind. He had saved others by obeying his father. He truly doesn't know how to not obey his father, which surprisingly isn't to say he can't make his own decisions. As stated, he is a leader and tries his best to act like one. But when it comes to things like leaving the house, he doesn't seem to know how to. He leaves to apologize to Diego and comes right back. He leaves to look for Five, but leaving without a reason other than he wants to, he seems to only realize is an option a week after his father's death, after he finds the unopened records from the moon. When in the more mentally stable of these times, Allison says, now Dad's not here to catch us. We can go anywhere we want. In the house, in the courtyard, Luther responds with, the real ward. This is not a response that would have been born out of nowhere. This is his hidden desire, and he has never been able to say until this moment. Finally, he can say it. So finally, we must touch on his relationship with Allison, which of course I can understand everyone not liking, as it is a bordering on incest relationship. However, to me, that's kind of the point. These people are good together. They help each other become better, but there will always be something wrong with them being together because of their upbringing. It is another thing that Sir Reginald has done to them. It would never have happened if they were brought up in a normal, healthy, adoptive home. But because of the extreme isolation and abuse they went through as children, this is what they have now. And they need to decide what to do with it. Like they all need to decide with the many different problems they have because of him. So tell me what you think of Luther in the comments below. Do you hate him? Do you still hate him? Feel free to hit the like button, the dislike button, any button you like. Farewell for now, my minions.